So, yes, we're going to talk about resiliency as far as the water system goes. Oh, I'm going to have to rely on you, Dave. Okay. So the city got a grant through an engineer who approached the city and said, hey, I know about some grant money we can get to do whatever you want to do. Well, being that I'm always looking at the future and going, oh, the future looks kind of grim from my standpoint, we need money to do studies. So the engineer said, okay, I'll get you money and we'll do a study. So he did. We went through what's called a SIP grant. We got $20,000. They did a study of our water system. So the grant doesn't get into great details, but it does pretty much look at the high level of all the things that we are facing and what we're looking at for costs. So I'm going to be kind of going over some of that stuff. So the plan was paid for through OHA, Oregon Health Authority, also known as the Drinking Water Program. And it was done through the Sustainable Infrastructure Planning Project Program. So we actually got that grant, and I call it grant, but it's what they call a forgivable loan. We've already reapplied and actually are probably going to be getting another one to do some more studying.
That's a smoke detector.
No, it can't be.
You're so hot.
That was a test. It
It really hurts.
really hurts the eye to put it out of it. So part of the intent of the study was the intent of the study to evaluate Manzanita's water system. This included not just our water tanks. This is from where we get the water to where the water goes to your guys' homes. Well, now it's working, Dave, I think. So the report was based off of information, the guidance that came from the Tillamook County Multi-Jurisdictional National Hazard Mitigation Plan. I've only read a small part of it. If any of you folks want to read it, you can find it on the Tillamook County's thing. And yes, it's yay thick, and we'll put you to sleep by page 2. If that one don't get you, the Oregon Resiliency Plan will. That one really puts you to sleep. But these are great plans. They are a cover-all. And so they are what I have to go to base what I'm going to do for Manzanita on. So I look at there saying, okay, this is what they say we should be doing, all the things, but only about yay much applies to us. So then we bring it back and I make up essentially a plan for us. Just recently I'm working on having to make a plan up for a tornado. Even a few years after, we're still trying to build that plan in because who would have thought?
Yeah.
So our water supply. Everybody know where Manzanita gets their water from? No? From the faucet. That is a correct answer. So we actually have 2 water sources. We have our primary water source, which is wells that are out along the Nehalem River about 7 miles from here. And then we also get water way up in the woods up here, which is our surface source. We don't use that source. It's been deemed as only for emergencies with the state. Why? Because surface water is way more expensive to produce than groundwater is. It also doesn't have the amount of water in the system that we could get to actually sustain Manzanita, especially in the summer months. Winter, when those creeks are flowing like rivers, we can get water. We'd be able to get water there all day long, but unfortunately during the summer months there's no way. So the dams, our water main is 4 miles of actual pipe. And it's 8-inch asbestos concrete. That is right now currently actually broken in several places, so it's not even an operable water source. It does not like ground movement. And where it's located, about 3.5 miles of that water pipe is in high slide areas. So ground shakes a little bit, that ground's going to be moving. I mean, that ground right now moves every time we get a good winter. Very, very limited access for us to get up there, especially during windstorms. Even where the dams are located now, even on good weather days, you've got to go trucking through the woods to get to the dams.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused by dams. If it comes out of a well, why do you need
That's
a dam?
our other water source. We have 2 water sources. Surface.
Oh, so all you're talking about now is just the surface.
Yep, where the water comes from. We're starting at the beginning, giving you kind of the rough overview so you guys can understand that after the big one, it's going to be a while before we get you water. And so at the very end, I'll throw actually the punchline now because I'll say it probably 3 times. The WASH program, get that class. Because when the big one happens, we're probably not going to have water to you for quite some time. So the well site.
How long ago was the surface line put in?
The surface line was put in somewhere, well, it's a hodgepodge, but the earliest is probably around 1960s, and they did some modifications in the 70s. Like I said, it's asbestos concrete, which everybody hates that word asbestos. They say in drinking water it doesn't do what breathing in does, but it's like concrete. It does not like movement whatsoever. Now, when the ground doesn't move, it's actually really good water pipe. It holds up well, but it don't like movement. And Oregon, the ground moves quite a bit. So our well site. So the well line was put in 2003. It's made of HDPE, which is high density polyethylene. This stuff I can literally take and drive a big piece of equipment over it several times and not really hurt it. It is a great earthquake resilient material. The only downside is during the resiliency study, it pointed out we have 2 exposures where the line comes up out of the ground, crosses over a little bridge, and back in the ground. Both of which are along the bay where it is expected to be high debris flow up against the walking bridge, essentially. So the engineer pointed out there are two likely places that line's going to fail. The other problem is 3.5 miles of the line, which starts at the Miami-Foley Junction and continues all the way up to Foss, is once again a high landslide area. So more than likely, as that big chunks of earth start sliding down that vertical face, the pipe is probably going to get elongated or pinched off or fail completely at a fitting. So we looked at that, and I used to brag because I thought that well line was our saving grace, and so the engineer proved me wrong. The other problem is once again, it's limited access. If the road, Foss Road, is taken out, trying to get to it will be very, very difficult. And I can tell you, during a big earthquake, Foss Road will disappear. I mean, any folks drive up that road? It's been slowly disappearing over the last several years. So, Dave? Thank you, sir. Now we're getting into more of the neighborhood stuff, the water storage. So, everybody kind of familiar with this area? This is our big blue reservoir. This is the old concrete reservoir in our welded steel tank. We currently hold about 2.2 million gallons of water total. So between all 3 tanks. So this one's 1/6, half, and a quarter. Oop, we missed a slide. Okay. So reservoir 1 is the green one. It's our it's 500,000 gallons. It was built in 1979. In 1979, they weren't going, oh boy, we should build something that will withstand an earthquake. Because in 1979, if you said there was going to be a major earthquake, they would have looked at you and laughed. So I went to a presentation, the guy said it really well. He says, before Mount St. Helens, there was no worry about a volcano blowing up in the Pacific Northwest. Well, we've been educated. Those guys back then, as one of our geologists back here, they started looking at all the stuff, the faults, the ground, the stuff way back when. And now we're starting to learn more and more and more about that type of stuff. So back in 1979, no building standards for earthquake. So it is a welded steel tank. We were hoping as a city that it would be a retrofittable tank. It is not. The sidewalls of the tank are very thin, a lot thinner than even the engineer would have suspected. Essentially, if we get the Cascadia earthquake, the walls will buckle and the tank will fail. And it's expected to empty out all of its contents out on the ground. So if you're below that tank, you're not exactly out of the tsunami zone area. So, Reservoir 2 is our concrete reservoir. It's our oldest one, built in 1960. So the Oregon Resiliency Plan pretty much says any tank that's built out of concrete in that time era is guaranteed to fail. There was no seismic whatsoever again. They didn't do really any reinforcement of tanks. It's a concrete tank. Concrete don't like a whole lot of movement. So Reservoir 3, which we call our big blue guy, was built in 96. Now we're starting to get into a little bit of earthquake standards that were put in, but not very much. It turned out after the engineer looked at information, the geological area and stuff, he said, hey, that big blue tank though is probably going to fail in a mild earthquake. So it does pose a risk to life safety because it is 1.6 million gallons of water on a essentially sand slope. And if it does fail, it's going to fail towards the Wolf area and essentially open it up. When I told my council members about this, you should have seen their eyeballs. They were big. I can't blame them because when I read it, my heart, I hate to skip the beat. So just out of your own kind of curiosity, for weight, you're looking at 13,344,000 pounds that's sitting on that top of that slope right there. Now, when we say that slope, Dave? Oh, wait. Yeah, okay, next one.
Back here.
Nope, one more back, there you go. So all three reservoirs are not designed for moderate earthquakes. Plumbing to the tanks are not designed for movement. There were no earthquake couplers put in when they put those tanks in. So if the tanks move, even if the tank survives, the plumbing coming into them, it's going to break off. So we're going to lose the contents of the tanks. So the other problem is the piping that is there is very complex. It's not a simple pipe in, pipe out. There has been some replumbing of those things, and it is a noodled mess up there.
So, question for you. So
Yeah.
are all of them full at all times, or are they managed down a bit?
They fluctuate a little bit. Typically, our biggest fluctuation is about 6 feet. So
So just curious, I mean, I know absolutely nothing about this until you just brought it up. But
yeah.
with that type of risk, why wouldn't the contents be managed down a bit further?
Because we have to keep so much water for what's called fire flows. And we have to keep so much water in them for actual pressures for the cities.
What do fire flows mean?
Fire flows are what is deemed as part of the system, and so if the city catches fire, that water is reserved just for that. So I guess you could say, like, say our blue reservoir, when it hits 20 feet, if it drops below 20 feet, I actually have to go to a boil water notice because we are losing pressure in certain aspects of the city. So that those tanks have to stay pretty full, especially the upper reservoirs. So
And you might reduce 13 million pounds to 10 million pounds. It's still probably an issue.
yeah.
It's that last million pounds that gets you.
So I was talking about the big blue reservoir, and it sits on sand on the slope, right? So this picture was, I think, if I remember right, it was taken 1986, 1989. So it was an aerial imagery we've done with Public Works. So here is Oak Street, and it's kind of hard to tell on here, but this actually goes downhill. And that's the tree line down below. When they went to put the blue reservoir in, they looked at the site and said, well, we got half a site, we need half more. So half of what the blue tank sits on is actually fill. So, yeah, you only can do so much with what money you have. And at the time, what they were doing seemed like everything was right. I can't fault them for that. Now there were some things they could have done a little bit, but it would have been more money. So.
Well, that's good. My house is safe.
So now here's the next recent photo. So here's that tank. Remember, the top of that slope was here. So now this kind of goes uphill and then drops real quick down. It's not even a one-to-one slope on the backside. It's pretty steep. That's why the engineer said, "Hey, look, this is going to end up down there."
Yeah.
That's all new development down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Google Map always looks better when it's on a small screen. So this area here is pulled from a geological report that says this is a slide areas. So they look at the maps, go through the ground, and they say, okay, they kind of make a rough line. Is it exact to a science as far as where this line's placement? Probably not. I mean, we'd have to have an engineer, geological engineer, come out and do some more fine tuning on it. But we do know this. This is our big blue reservoir, our concrete reservoir, and our green reservoir. We are already seeing movement of the ground here and over here. This area was allowed to be filled with rock from the Neoconi Mountain slide way back. When was the big Neoconi slide? That was 95, 96. So they filled that full of rock there. Sand, they pushed the sand over here. And this road here was just kind of built. A lot of people have probably seen the cracks in the road. We had a geotechnical report done on that Pacific area. They said pretty much it's sand and it's going to move a little bit. There's not a lot you can do with it except for add more asphalt or add geofabric to help. But it kind of goes with that concept of this engineer saying that could be a problem. Or not could, it is a problem. So this is across from our shop up there on Oak. We've actually filled this in a few times in the last year and a half, and it just keeps sliding away. This is about a foot elevation difference between here and here. And then this is out of the engineering report. This is where, like I said, we've been seeing some creeping of the road here. One more, Dave. Thanks. So there's that guardrail. You can see that guardrail starting to kind of push off at an angle. We're not considerably worried about this area right here because it's creeping. The geological report doesn't expect it to just fall away by any means. And it's really not affecting the water mains up there because the water main is on this side of the road. But once again, it is movement up around that big blue tank. So now, the who, what, when, and where. So city staff, myself, our council, city managers, we've all been looking at a list of things to do and how to balance them with the everyday expenditures. Because I can tell you now, when we do the budget, Manzanita's got a lot of expensive homes, but unfortunately, Manzanita doesn't get a lot of property tax. So last year, surprisingly, the city brought in just under $200,000 in property taxes. That's got to pay for parks, police. Doesn't have to pay for fire anymore. But so most of the income that goes to water project stuff comes from the water billing funds, and what comes from also the short-term rental tax. That's pretty much the saving grace to our budget. So that's what's been allowing us to do city projects. So the engineer, besides giving us all the gloom and doom, has to give us a little bit of sunshine. Well, their sunshine comes with a price tag. Some projects we can do and are working on now. Some projects we are looking at in the future, be it via pay for by grants or some other financial way of taking care of it. One of the biggest things we're trying to do right now, and we're in the process of it, is establish a third well. That well is actually looking at being established right at the water treatment facility. So
Where's that?
right at the top of 101 here, there's a big brick building. And so the concept is it doesn't have to be a deep well. We're going after essentially water in the sand because we can take that water and then pump it through that filtration plant. Because that filtration plant is a state-of-the-art plant. Even though it was put in 2003, it is still some of the best technology there is for actual water filtration. So it will strip out a lot of stuff. Even if we had an outbreak, often would we never ever see something like that, but like even anthrax, so you hear about in the news and stuff, that filter system is designed to remove that. It takes out cryptosporidium, giardia, everything like that. So it's a great piece of technology. But what good is a tool in the toolbox if you can't take it out of the box? So that's why we want to put that well in, so we can at least pull 80 gallons a minute out of the ground, put it into the water plant, and then work from there. We'll be able to essentially distribute water from the water treatment facility out. So we're starting at the sources, trying to work our way out that way. Because I've already had people say, well, why don't you just fix the reservoirs? It's cost. And if I can't get water to the reservoir, what good is the reservoir?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you said 80 gallons a minute is what the well capacity is?
that's what we're shooting for.
What's the total draw? how's that gonna get spread over the city? In other words, what's the total draw
Well,
from your
te-
water
typi-
tanks?
So typically on an everyday usage, we typically run, now it fluctuates big time between
Yeah.
winter and summer, but winter time we usually pump at about 500 gallons a minute, okay? And we run for 24 hours on, and then we're off for 48. The summer months, we usually run full time at 500 gallons a minute. So why am I only going for 80 gallons a minute? Because I'm only trying to get water for emergency purposes. It's not for us to keep a summer tourism, because quite frankly, the big one happens, tourism is going to be way down. I don't think people are going to, even though after the tornado, tourism was way up, because everyone wanted to see it,
Unless the tourists are already out here.
unless they're already out here. And so, but, once again, if I can get 80 gallons a minute to start,
At least we can drink water.
yeah,
People don't die of thirst.
yep,
What-
yeah.
What's the effect on the wells themselves in the event of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake?
Our wells out there, so I call them wells, and technically they're called wells, but they're not like a typical well that you're used to where wells go down into an actual true aquifer. So in earthquakes you can get shifting of those aquifers and stuff. We are in a pristine mother-made filtration system along the Nehalem River. And so even during an earthquake you get the shifting of materials, essentially they become stratified. The rock in there is already stratified. So the hope is the wells will remain. They're not even down to bedrock. They're only down 60 feet. So the hope is to be able to maintain them, but getting the water from there to here is the challenge. And the other thing is it takes power. Well, we have a big generator out there, and at full tilt, that generator will run about 2.5 days before it runs out of fuel.
So are we talking that people will have to try to get to a spot to collect, to get their share of water and then take it back?
Under this process, yes. We will, the concept is that once the well is in, at the water plant, we can get water into the plant. And we have the means of a big generator there as well to pump water. We also, the water treatment plant sits on water tanks. So typically I keep that water tank full, which is about 80,000 gallons of water in reserve. We installed a little pump to be able to pump water out of that tank, so I don't have to run the big generators for it. But we have a small 110 that we can pump water out. The idea is to be able to put it in buckets, buffaloes. We're still working on some of the ways to move it around the area. So, but once again, it's just at first just trying to make it so we can get water. The resiliency plans pretty much say that after the Cascadia event, it will be over 6 months before water can be reestablished. So we're trying to make things so I can at least say within that 6 months I can get water established. It won't get back to your homes, because we are a small sand grain in this whole event, and getting water parts to fix water mains, it's going to be a long time. So that's one of the things we're working on. You can see the resiliency value is high. So it is a $250,000 project. None of these projects are really cheap. So the other concept was, of course, to bring in some more additional wells out there, but the engineer says that's really low because, once again, the main between here and there is not likely to survive. Other things, bypass reservoirs, bleed out controls, things like that. You can see the big dollar marks right here. So, and most of those are pretty medium to high, like bleed out control at the city limits. These are city limits. We have connections to other water systems, the city of Nehalem and the Oconee water. We have interties with them. But remember, these are at the end of our distribution system. Our distribution systems are not going to be there after the Cascadia event. So even a mild earthquakes, 4s to 5s, we probably will see some water mains break, because still about a third of our water system is all made of asbestos concrete. The distribution lines are. So the other thing we're working on, I'm looking at, is the decommission of Reservoir 2, which is the concrete reservoir. So once again, it's really complicated plumbing up there. That thing is so old, If it breaks, essentially it will run itself out of water, and it will run the Big Blue reservoir down to less than 50% capacity because they're tied together. So, engineer says, really, that 250,000 gallons is not doing you guys that big of a difference. Unhook that thing and just plan on decommissioning it. The other thing we're working on is GIS. Anybody familiar with GIS? So everybody's familiar with Google Maps, right? Okay. Well, GIS is a system where it takes all of my data, as far as my water maps, my valve locations, mains, valve, everything, and gets it in one big platform to be used. So no more pieces of paper. So I spend my day when I have to look something up, I look something up on a piece of paper, and then I go to a map. And sometimes they say the same things, sometimes they don't. So this information gets everything on there. It also makes it where I can share it. If during the big one, something falls and takes me out, one of the other water operators then can pick up a piece, literally pick up the tablets and be able to use them. Yes, tablets require power, but we have ways of keeping those charged with solar and such. But it's an informational system. This information is also shared with the state of Oregon, the Drinking Water Program, the National Guard. So if they come in and they say, we got to get water to this city, we've worked all the way to here, they look at it and say, okay, we know what's there. So this is another high priority thing, and one that we're actually writing a grant for of all the utilities. And from the sounds of it, we probably will be getting a grant. We're pretty excited about it. So that's the end of my slideshow. Like I said, the report is much more detailed and in the weeds about things, but I want to try to keep it as basic as I could. It is kind of gloom and doom, unfortunately, but it's what it is. Yeah.